Hi everybody, welcome to Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill in the heart of downtown Charleston. This is the WVHuddle.com Prep Football Podcast. I am Tom Bragg from the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Got a big cast here today. We got Derek Taylor, the Gazette-Mail Assistant Sports Editor, Ryan Pritt to my left here, Gazette-Mail Prep Reporter, and Rick Ryan making his Prep Football Podcast debut. Rick is also a Prep Sports Reporter for us. Gentlemen, lots of lopsided scores. We'll hop right in. But lots of lopsided scores last week. If you look here locally in the Kanawha Valley, all three, GW, South Charleston, Capital, all looking like they're going to be some of the stronger teams in AAA. Of course, we know South Charleston and Capital from last year brought a lot back. GW caught us a little bit by surprise, but it seems like they could be right there, neck and neck with the other two. It's been a long time since we've had all three this good at one time. You had, the Switzer years where GW was good and South Charleston was there too. South Charleston, of course, won a couple titles, or played for a couple titles, won the one. And then Capital winning last year, but we haven't had it all at the same time. Derek, we'll start with you. Is this maybe the best collectively that those three schools have been in quite some time?
Yeah, I would probably say since 2010, which was John Carpenter's first year at Capital.
Is that Keon Wright?
That was Keon Wright's 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, Keon Wright's senior year. That was the year South Charleston and Hurricane met in that ill-fated quarterfinal playoff, and it was Ryan Switzer's sophomore year at GW. I think with talking about all three of them being at that level, that high level again this year, one of the things that has to be addressed is GW's early season schedule. I mean, they've got Winfield, this Friday. They have wins against, Riverside, St. Albans, and who's their opener? Parkersburg. That I covered.
Parkersburg.
Yeah, yes. GW opened with Parkersburg on the road, and I was there. So they have 3 wins against teams that have 1 win between them, and that was St. Albans beating Riverside. So we're going to see what GW is made of here pretty soon. That said, I think they're better than they have been, so I do think that this is one of those years that we get the core 3 schools in the Kanawha Valley, the Charleston metro area, all on that playoff level again.
Fellas?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. The loss to Spring Valley by South Charleston, kind of looms large when you look at the rest of their schedule. Still got Midland this week, Hurricane and GW on there. They should win the Hurricane game, you would think.
Yeah.
But, you're talking 3 losable games, and if they happen to lose all of them, they're not in the playoffs. So I think we learn even more than we already know about the Black Eagles this week.
Definitely. Rick?
Well, you mentioned all 3 of those teams being good at the same time. I think what's interesting is they're actually a little bit different than you might remember them in recent years. GW had, I think, 4 years in a row had a 2,000-yard rusher. Now they've got 2 top 10 passers in the MSAC. So they're a little bit of a different attack. Capital had the big tailback for Kayshawn Haley for a number of years. Now they got little Silas Nazario, and they found out that maybe it's not a good idea to run him 20 times a game between the tackles. So a little bit different approach from some of those teams. I guess South Charleston is pass happy, which it always has been. But they're all rising to the levels we think they're going to rise to, but they're kind of doing it in a different manner.
Good point.
Another game of local interest in AA, the Tulsa Herbert Hoover game last week at Tulsa. Tulsa ends up winning 32-7. That was a big game going forward as far as the Cardinal Conference standings are concerned. But you start looking at these 2 teams, and they both have kind of different paths from here on out. There's a couple potential landmines in the back half of that schedule for Tulsa, but they got through the test with Wayne in week 1, Mingo Central, now Herbert Hoover. I believe they've got Boyd County from Kentucky and Chapmanville still on their schedule as 2 big potential pitfalls there. But you're looking at the Rebels; they could be, top 5 seed in AA pretty easily at this point, I think. And on the other side of that, with Herbert Hoover, you've still got the Waynes and the Mingo Centrals and those teams on that back half of the schedule. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room for Herbert Hoover. They need to get some wins, and they need to win the games that they're supposed to. I know they've played teams tough. They lost that close game to Chapmanville, but you got to win some of those every now and then. It seems like that's been the case with Herbert Hoover the last couple of years. Rick, we can start with you on that stuff in the Cardinal Conference.
I saw Hoover against Wayne in the Cardinal Conference Gururama, and they just didn't look very good. Hoover didn't, and I thought it might be a lean year, maybe not even contending for playoffs. And now, still at 2-2, like you said, if they can win half of those games that are facing them, the challenge games, then they should be in pretty good position. Tulsa, I don't think anybody saw them beating 2 top 5 teams right off the bat coming into the season, and I know their fans were not very happy with their ranking in the Gazette-Mail poll after they think it should be ranked ahead of the Fairmont teams and whatnot. But the Hoover coach told me last week that Tulsa doesn't do a lot of different things on offense. They just do the same things well, and you have to stop it. And he thought maybe they could slow them down or stop them, and I guess they fell behind and never got a chance to catch up.
Right.
Yeah, those were all good points about Hoover. And a quick little add to Tulsa scheduling. They are in a sneaky top 5 battle this week with Tug Valley, I believe. I know Tug Valley is single A, and you would certainly think that Tulsa would be favored in that game, but that's kind of a showcase game for both teams, I think. And it's kind of heartbreaking for Hoover. I don't think anybody's been as close to breaking through, because even last week in a 32-7 loss, that's a close game in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And turnovers kind of killed
them.
The
score wasn't necessarily indicative of how that game went. It seemed like it was close, like you said, throughout, and just a bad fourth quarter, like a 5-10 minute period, and it just like I said at the start of this, it seems like that's Hoover's knocked on the door so many times, but they just haven't been able to quite push through and get in.
I think they've certainly proven that they're talented enough, though, to maybe win a game or two you wouldn't think they would win in the back half, and certainly make the playoffs. But
Derek?
I think a lot of it has to do with our perceptions. I mean, coming into a season, Hoover starts off with this win against Scott, who's pretty much a perennial AA playoff team. Scott is really struggling this year. So I think that the Cardinal Conference has more depth from top to bottom than a lot of leagues do. There's not much margin for error. I don't think for really anybody except for a typical Wayne team, Mingo Central and stuff like that. Tulsa has proven itself, I think, to be a legitimate team this year, and it's not whether we've agreed finally or whatever. I mean, they've gone out and done it.
They just keep winning.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't argue with that.
So, I mean, for Hoover to break through, at this point, for me, Hoover's going to have to break through, and then actually I'm going to have to see it in the rear view going, Hoover's been close a lot and hasn't been able to push through in the last couple of years.
Some other games to note from around the state last week, and I'll just go through a list here and get your guys' thoughts on. You can add anything that I might miss. Game you were at, Ryan, Bridgeport, #1 in AA for what seems like forever, just rolls through conference, county, city, everything rival Robert C. Byrd. Now, Byrd was able to do a little bit there. It wasn't a complete one-sided affair, but Bridgeport clearly the better of the two teams. Another game in AAA, local team Hurricane goes up to the Northern Panhandle, makes a big comeback there towards the end, loses by 1 point at Brook. I think that's Hurricane's first loss, so something to think about for them. Got to get back into the MSAC schedule now. I mean, you take that trip and you can see maybe getting out of your element, out of your routine, but you got to get back in now. Let's see the big Cabell County schools, Cabell, Midland, and Huntington, both big wins against teams that just are not having great years in Winfield and Woodrow Wilson. That's
right.
Gosh, that was a lopsided one there. Oh, let's see. In the northern part of the state, Preston beat Elkins. Preston, kind of quietly. I think they're 3-1 now. Looking at the schedule, not a whole lot of big challenges. They do have Bridgeport, I believe, in the last game of the season. But the Knights are looking at they got a 2, maybe 3 loss season. That's going to be set up good for them as far as playoff seeding goes. And last one I'll get, Sissonville wins big over Scott, and if there was a team in the state that needed a win in the worst way, it was Sissonville. Ryan, we'll start with you. Just anything to add on those or any games I missed you wanted to bring up?
The Bridgeport game, I think it was 48-21 was the final. That was 34-21 with 3 minutes to go in that game. Really, truly a game where both coaches walked away from that unhappy. Byrd did anything they wanted to on offense except score in the second half. They had a first and goal at the 6-yard line down by 13 points and got turned away by Bridgeport. The main thing there, and you can't really fault Bird here because a lot of teams have this problem. They could not tackle Bonamico or Tonkery all night. Even if they got in the backfield, it didn't matter. Bridgeport scored touchdowns on 7 of 9 drives.
Jeez.
Another drive was a missed field goal, and the 9th drive was kneeling the clock out. So, Bridgeport offensively is certainly living up to the billing so far this year, and did it again last week.
Rick, your thoughts?
I second your emotion on Sissonville. I really felt bad for Mark Wilson. I think his honeymoon was starting to run out. He was kidding around with me last week when I talked to him and said that he was starting to hear it from some of the fans. Even though his starting quarterback and returning starter he's playing on an ankle that's probably only about 80%. People can be kind of hard to demand instant results when you come in. So, good for him. He's able to get that off the schneid.
Derek, what do you got?
Well, there's every season, and Rick will, I'm sure, agree with me on this. There's weeks that you look at the statewide schedule and go, this is a dog week. There's just, and this was kind of that week. There are a lot of lopsided scores around the state. I don't know that we learned a whole lot this past week other than Sissonville. That's a big game, big win for them. Following kind of suit with what happened to them last year with losing 3 out the gate. But we have some things that I don't think a lot of people expected. Lincoln being 4-0, for instance. Braxton County is quietly winning a lot of games. Roane County, after a kind of what looks to be a really curious loss from week 1 to Work County, is just rolling off win after win now, and they're 3-1 and getting in good shape. So as we're getting to the middle of the season, we're starting to see a little bit more of who's going to be contending for those 16 spots for the playoffs.
While we have a second, I was going to ask you and Rick, we kind of came in here last week talking about how we almost expected Brooke to win that game.
Yeah.
So from afar, I'm watching the scores, and it's 28-7 Brooke, and you're thinking, oh, there we are, we're right. I almost left that game more impressed with Hurricane even in the loss.
I kind of
did.
did.
The way they came back, and where it failed 2-point conversion away from winning that game on the road. I thought that was a pretty good response for Jeremy Taylor's guys, even if they didn't win the game.
Absolutely. I saw the same thing as I was covering my game. I kept clicking, refresh on the scores, and Hurricane kept inching closer and closer. That's 2 teams from this area with good records, Hurricane and Huntington being the other one, that have made that trip to Brooke and had difficult times. Hurricane didn't, get out with a win, but Huntington struggled up there too.
Right.
And it's one of those things. How good is Brooke versus how much? We're still talking about high school kids, and that's an awfully long trip to make on a Friday, man.
Brooke went up there a few years ago and had probably a lot better team than Brooke and escaped with a close win. So it's just kind of balancing that.
Yep.
The averages.
I've got it pulled up now, so we can get into the Gazette Mail football poll for Week 5. And if this is your first time watching how we do this segment, we go through each class, the top 10, the others receiving votes. We look at who there maybe some of the big games from ranked teams outside the poll coming in this week, and then we move on. Start with AAA, AA, and then we wrap up with single A. But in class AAA, number 1 for the second week in a row, Cabell Midland. The Knights received 7 first-place votes. They're 4-0. Big game for them at South Charleston this week. Number 2, Wheeling Park. They move up from number 3 last week. Hopped Capital, who, of course, was defending state champions and number 1 and undefeated until they ran into Cabell Midland 2 weeks ago. Right. Wheeling Park received 2 first-place votes. They're 2-0-1 with that tie in the Bridgeport game, and they host Brooke. Number 3, Capital. They host Hurricane this week. The Cougars are 3-1. Number 4, Point Pleasant received the first-place vote. Big Blacks are 4-0. They cross the river and play at Gallia Academy, Ohio on Friday. Excuse me. Number 5, same as last week, Huntington High. They host Riverside this week. Riverside, man, just tough.
That's a brutal schedule for Riverside.
It's the MSAC. When you see the same things with St. Albans Nitro, some of the smaller MSAC teams, Ripley. It's hard to get going. Yep. You got to go through all that. Definitely. But at number 6, getting outside the MSAC, Morgantown. The Mohegans are 4-0. Big game for them. Got to make the trip to Martinsburg this week. Number 7, Jefferson. If I told you there was one AAA team ranked in the Eastern Panhandle and it wasn't Martinsburg,
that's
outside the last 3 weeks, it would have sounded pretty odd. But Jefferson, Cougars have been really good, putting up a lot of points, putting up a lot of yards so far. They are 3-0. They host Shenandoah, Virginia.
That's interesting because that's one of Martinsburg's losses. I think that's a big watch for everybody with Jefferson.
At number 8 this week, South Charleston, the Black Eagles. Number 8 for the second week in a row, that previously mentioned game at home against Capital Midland. So it's good to get that at home, but going to be a tough one for the Black Eagles. At number 9, George Washington. GW making their first appearance in the poll this season. Of course, not ranked last week, coming off a big lopsided win at home against Riverside. The Patriots at home again this week for Winfield, and tied with them actually at number 9, the other Patriots, Parkersburg South. They are off this week, and then they host Point Pleasant on October 2nd. That's going to be a big one. Also receiving votes in Class AAA, Martinsburg, Hurricane, and Spring Valley. That's a pretty solid. I mean, not just top 10, but you throw in those receiving votes. That's the playoff field. Essentially. Thoughts on AAA from you guys? We can just go around the table.
Start with me.
Sure.
You know, Martinsburg Morgantown obviously I think it's a great game for us down here to learn a little bit about where both of these schools are. The thing about Martinsburg, they've lost 2 games out of state. If they lose to Morgantown, they've got Jefferson left on the schedule. It's really the last big test. And you think 6-4, but wait a minute, Martinsburg has a 9-game schedule. So all of a sudden this becomes really big. Point. They can't afford to lose to both Morgantown and Jefferson. So going up there and seeing what they've got for the Mohegans, that should be really fun, I think.
Rick?
I think Point Pleasant, Parkersburg South, when that comes up, that might tell us a little bit more about each team. South lost a heartbreaker to Morgantown, but Point's been rolling against everybody, but half the time they're playing teams that you don't follow during the course of the year, so you don't know how good or how not good they are. So it might, if it's a close game, teams, we found out before, teams need close games to work on certain things during the course of the season, and that might be beneficial for both.
Yeah, I think back to that Capital Midland game last year. It was really the big test for the Cougars throughout the regular season. Of course, they had that South Charleston game, ended up blowing that one out, but they sort of got their momentum and saw what they were made of, and that one, of course, rolled on to that AAA title. Maybe see a similar thing out of one of these teams this season. In Class AA this week, no surprises at the top. Bridgeport, number 1, receiving all 10 first place votes. They are at East Fairmont this week. Might be a rough day for the Bees at East West Stadium. Number 2, Bluefield. Beavers are 4-0 at Greenbrier East. That's kind of an interesting game. If I had to pick, I think I would pick Bluefield in that one, but that could be an interesting game for the Beavers.
Greenbrier East is scoring a lot of points and putting up a lot of yards.
Yeah, but giving up a lot of points.
Yeah, that's true. They have a running back who's just going all over the place.
Xavion Lawson.
Yeah.
At number 3, Fairmont Senior, Polar Bears, undefeated 4-0. They got to make a bit of a trip this week. Not too bad. They're at Elkins. It's not easy to get to from Fairmont.
It's just a drag of a drive.
When I had to go there from Fairmont, it was always bad weather, snow, rain, whatever. But hopefully none of that this week for us. Polar Bears make that trip. At number 4, Kaiser, 4-0. They are at home this week against Allegheny, Maryland, so another out-of-state foe for Kaiser. Well, just with location. That's how that's going to happen. Number 5, Tulsa. The Rebels also undefeated. That game we mentioned earlier at home against Tug Valley. That'll be a big one for both schools. At number 6, Chapmanville. The Tigers 3-0. They are at Clay County. Number 7, Nicholas County. The Grizzlies are 3-0. They are at Clay County. I read that wrong. Chapmanville is host Logan this week. Tiny screen, bad eyes. I apologize. Just getting that straight. Chapmanville at number 6, at home against Logan. Nicholas County, number 7, at Clay County. Sorry for any confusion. Number 8, Mingo Central. The Miners, 2-1, at home against Class AAA Nitro. Might be a preview of seasons to come with all the talk about Nitro possibly moving down to AA. You got to think they would be able to maybe find a home in the Cardinal Conference if that would happen. Just speculation at this point, though. At number 9, Lincoln, the Cougars 4-0 at South Harrison. And you had a story that we'll get into just a little bit about that game coming up. Number 10, Robert C. Byrd coming off that loss to number 1, Bridgeport. The Eagles are 2-2. They host Grafton. Also receiving votes in Class AA, Weir, James Monroe, Wayne, and Independence. And let's, Derek, talk a little bit about that Lincoln and South Harrison game. When it's not something you're talking about in July, like, oh man, can't wait for that Lincoln and South Harrison game. But as you get into sort of the swing of things, these games start to pop up on the schedule that you might not have, like we said, circled in July. But here we are, and this is a pretty good, really big game actually for both teams.
I like this matchup, and I talked to Rob Hawkins, Lincoln's coach, on Monday or Tuesday, And, it's interesting because we have 3-0 South Harrison. They had a week off last week against 4-0 Lincoln. And these aren't the two, Harrison County is so dominated by Bridgeport and Robert C. Byrd that you almost forget that there's 4 other schools in that county, And it's also, it's not just that they're having successful seasons, but this is like, having lived in Harrison County, this is the other side of Harrison County. You have the Bridgeport and Byrd and, Clarksburg and Bridgeport and the whole Italian essence and restaurants and, the socioeconomics of there. And you have a more rural Harrison County, and that's Lincoln and South Harrison. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, a really interesting matchup. Lincoln has a running back by the name of Andrew Lopez, who is real close to, if not over, 1,000 yards so far in 4 games rushing.
That's pretty good.
And the thing is, he's right there in the shadow of Dylan Tonkery and Dante Bonamico. So how much statewide attention he's going to get, or is he going to get, when he's not even the biggest star in his own area? So it's an opportunity for a Lincoln or a South Harrison to really take a little bit more of the blanket with a win this Friday.
Fellas, your thoughts on AA?
Oh, I think you write off teams like Wayne when they have a little stumble coming out of the gate and not even have been in the poll the last couple of weeks. Teams that have shown through a decade or so that they're pretty competent, I think you don't just brush them off too quickly. I think we might still hear something from teams like that before it's all out.
Yeah, I've got to imagine if you're one of the teams hosting a first-round game, you don't want to draw Wayne coming to town.
That's right. Like with Valley at Magnolia a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit earlier, who were we talking about the second half of the season being stacked with tests? I think it was Hoover.
Yeah, Hoover. Hoover's got a lot. They've got Wayne, Chapmanville, stuff like that.
How about as we round the corner here halfway, what Chapmanville has on the backside?
Yeah.
We're sitting here 4-0, feeling pretty good, and that schedule has to be loaded. I don't have it here in front of me, but just knowing who they played so far, they have to have a few tests coming up.
Yeah, they still got to deal with Tulsa, Mingo Central, and Wayne in the back half of that schedule.
You talked about Alex Berry last week and how good of a season he's having. I think we found out a lot about Chapmanville in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, they put themselves in good position so far, but that's an interesting team, I think, moving forward.
Totally agree.
All right, moving on to Class A at number 1, Magnolia, 10-0 at Wheeling Central. We'll touch on that one, trust me, when we get through the list. Number 2, Moorfield, also undefeated at 4-0, also on the road at Petersburg. Number 3, Williamstown, 3-1. They host Ravenswood. Number 4, Wheeling Central. Maroon Knights are 4-0. The previously mentioned game at home, against Magnolia. Number 5, Man, the Hillbillies, 4-0 at Fayetteville. That's kind of an interesting game. Number 6, Tug Valley, also undefeated at Tulsa. It's interesting. Just looking at the list here, it catches you. Every single team in Class A in the top 10 doesn't have a loss. So we've talked about it every week. This is just one of those years in Class A. Where we leave off at number 6, Tug Valley at Tulsa. Number 7, St. Mary's. They are off this week. They're off this week. They dropped down a couple spots from number 5 last week, and they will host Williamstown on October 2nd. At number 8, Buffalo, the Bison are 4-0. They are at Tigers Valley. No, excuse me. They are off this week and at Tug Valley next week. So that's another big one for Tug Valley coming up next week. At number 9, East Hardy, 3-0 at Tigers Valley. And number 10, Bishop Donahue, 4-0. They host Cameron. Also receiving votes, just one team, South Harrison in Class A, and we got to get into Magnolia, Wheeling Central. Derek, I'll let you start, but Magnolia's already had a really big game experience with Williamstown this year, so not really anything new with them. But Ryan, I think you and I were joking about this in the office earlier this week. This might just be one of those Wheeling Central years where they're just not going to lose to anybody, so something's got to give here.
Yeah, I mean, Rick and I know this rivalry pretty well. I think both being Ohio Valley people. I mean, it's Magnolia's defense is putting up numbers like it did in 2010 when it won the AA title. Central's coming off. I mean, this is another weird thing about this game is both these teams missed the playoffs last year.
Magnolia won this game last year, didn't they?
No.
Oh, they didn't?
No, they didn't. They wrong. No, but it was like a 1-point loss. I think it was like 8-7 or something really weird. Central, I think, finished 3-7 last year. They were really young, really tough schedule. Just sounds familiar. I mean, sounds like Magnolia, doesn't it?
they both bring a lot back. They're playing out at Wheeling Jesuit, which, you know, Central doesn't play on the island anymore. And I just think that's a cool element of this game, particularly. It's always a great, I don't know that it's always a great game, but
seems like it's
pretty often
it's a
really good game. Yeah.
Rick, your thoughts on that game and anything else going on in Class A this week?
I'm just glad they're playing again. I know they were both AA for a long time, and they were big rivals when they were AA.
Yeah.
And then they went through a spell where they didn't play each other in Class A for whatever reason. So I think it's just good. The teams in a certain area, no matter what area of the state it is, play the other good teams in their class. Yeah. And it tells us a little bit about each one.
Mr. Pritt?
Not a lot to add on that game, but looking elsewhere, you mentioned St. Mary's dropped a couple spots this week.
Yeah.
Really hammered a Tyler team last week and gave Williamstown some problems. I think Tyler led the Williamstown game in the second quarter. So
yeah, St. Mary's was number 5 last week, number 7 this week.
I think there's two things to that. One, that St. Mary's Tyler game was on a Thursday night when not a lot of people were scoreboard watching, so it wasn't really in a lot of people's minds. Two, I think what Tom mentioned about everybody in the single A poll being undefeated, I think what's happening is voters are actually just kind of looking at, since we have so many of them, who's beating the tar out of who better on a Friday night. I think we're just having minor little adjustments. St. Mary's is what? Where in the poll? 8?
There's 7.
7? Okay.
7, down from 5 last week.
Right, okay. I mean, you know, I talked to a couple guys from the Parkersburg paper on Friday night and asked them about, you know, how good is St. Mary's. Well, they're pretty good. You know, how good are they in relation to everybody else? I don't know that we're gonna know until later in the year.
Yep.
They've got Williamstown coming up, and they play Magnolia too. So
I can see them
2 tests there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. We'll move on from the poll now. And last week we talked about some players to keep an eye on, things like that. This week we'll do something similar, but let's focus on the defensive side of the ball. It seems like this is about the time of the year, not necessarily where favorites emerge for the individual awards, but you start getting an idea of who's going to be in the running, who are the kids to maybe start keeping an eye on. The Huff Award, the award for Defensive Player of the Year in West Virginia, it seems like October, late September, when you start figuring that out. Well, it's late September, almost early October. Derek, is anybody sticking out as guys maybe to keep an eye on defensive side of the ball?
So far, you know what? I came into the season thinking Ryan Gatrell at Huntington, and you know the fact that Huntington is 4-0, and honestly, I don't think this Huntington team is as good overall as they've been in the last several years. I don't think they're as good on defense as they've been for the last several years, and honestly, I think Billy Seals would tell you the same thing. However, Ryan Gatrell, their linebacker, is holding down the fort for them, and as long as he keeps doing that and they keep winning, I think he's definitely going to be in that conversation.
I think it'd be hard to have a better defense than they had.
Hold
Martinsburg under 100 yards in the state title game. That, for 2 years there, that kind of defense they had just doesn't come up very often.
Yep. Yeah, so it's hard to, when the bar's that high, it's,
Anybody in particular stuck out
now? Was Derek Pitts, was he considered lineman, linebacker for South Charleston?
Outside linebacker?
Outside linebacker.
Yeah.
So, I mean, coming into the season, I think that was a name that was getting a lot of attention because of all the offers he was getting. And, you know, they've had kind of a 2-2 start, a little bit up and down. So, you know, I really haven't made a commitment on him, but I guess he'd be one of the big names that popped up at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Anybody from any of the smaller schools? Because with these things, you tend to gravitate towards the big schools and the kids playing in the big games that get a lot of hype. But oftentimes, you know, there's kids in AA, kids in single A that can play at that level too. They might just not get as much recognition or as much coverage as some of the others. Anybody from any of the double or single A schools that stuck out? Ryan, you've seen a lot of AA football this year. You might be the guy to go to on this.
Dante Harris at Fairmont Senior, lineman, sophomore, has turned in the best individual defensive performance I've seen this year. And I would give an honorable mention while we're mentioning smaller schools. Magnolia has a defensive lineman. His last name's Hostetler, and I'm not sure what his first name is, and I apologize to him.
There's a lot of Hostetlers around the
He gave Williamstown nightmares that night, too. He's certainly a force to deal with at that level, too.
Well, I guess that almost wrapped things up here from Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill. Of course, second week down here. It's been gracious hosts.
Oh yeah,
It's been really good to us.
here. Actually,
Go through.
it's really
I mean,
nice.
oh yeah, it's really nice. There's all kinds of
should
things.
be here.
We've got a list of Adelphia things to read to you here, and it makes me want to come to Adelphia 7 nights a week. I think Monday Night Football, happy hour drafts, and 60-cent wings during the game. You got 8 lunches under $8 Monday through Thursday from 11 to 2 in the afternoon. On October 3rd, guys' night out, WVU versus Oklahoma. October 30th, Halloween party, cash prizes and giveaways. Wednesdays is rib night and live music down here, and you can get, football, basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer. There's I can't even count how many TVs there are in here real quick, but there's a bunch of TVs. You can watch whatever you want. And ladies' night is every Thursday. They've got half-price select appetizers.
Right on, man.
Half-price select appetizers for everyone, and ladies get 2-for-1 drink specials. So if you're hungry or thirsty or want to watch sports or just want to sit in a nice room with some good air conditioning, then you got Adelphia at 218 Capitol Street, downtown Charleston. Wrap it up, though. Kind of do our parting shots here, and I'll start something that stuck out to me over the last couple of weeks. Our player of the week, each of the last 2 weeks has been a sophomore quarterback. It's Ethan Burgess from Buffalo this week, Andrew Huff from Winfield last week. Friday night, Rick and I were both up at the GW game. We got to see some of Grant Wells, and he's a freshman, really good quarterback. He's splitting time with Caleb Mackey, but it just sort of started to stick out to me that, okay, this next crop of quarterbacks in the area is really starting to emerge with Huff and Burgess, and with Wells going forward might end up being the best out of all three of them. And I think we've been kind of spoiled the last couple of years with guys like Greer and Pratt. You get to see them play not just, okay, they're a junior, here's the ball, or, oh, he's a senior now, he gets to be the starter. We've seen these kids play since they were ninth graders, and you just don't get that from really good quarterbacks, particularly around here a whole lot. So just something, guys, to keep an eye on going forward, and don't be distraught if you're a big quarterback fanboy that we're losing Greer and Pratt, because there's other guys coming in behind him that can sling it around too.
Good deal.
I guess we'll start with you and work around. Anything you want to add here at the end?
Oh yeah. We just briefly spoke about the Huff Award, and while it's good, I think, to get names out there, we to start focusing on these things, individuals, and who is standing out. We're going into week 5 of the regular season, and a lot of my feedback since last week has been about the Kennedy Award. Folks, we're 6-9 weeks away from voting for the Kennedy Award, and it's now in the next couple of weeks, what we're going to see is people actually emerge as legitimate candidates for that. As of today, people getting hyped for this or that for the Kennedy, it's way too early, I think. But enjoy the season. This isn't the presidential election cycle that we've got to decide who the front runner is a year and a half ahead of time. Let's enjoy the process, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Ryan Prick, anything you want to add here at the end?
Yeah, I gotta send a call out to Poca. We kind of talk about these, top-ranked teams and these big matchups. If I had told you 10 to 15 years ago that Poca would endure a stretch of 21 straight losses and are now on the verge of back-to-back 0-10 seasons following a 1-9 season, you would have called me crazy. Yeah. But you talked a little bit about Scott, about how this is the most vulnerable they're probably going to be for a while under Shane Griffith. I know he told me last year they lost just a ton of seniors off of that team. Poca's 5 games after Scott this week. Herbert Hoover, Mingo Central, Wayne, Sissonville, and Tulsa. Better get it this week, Dots. Better get it this week.
Oh, Rick, you want to wrap up with anything here?
Yeah, I was typing in the MSAC standings last night, and I know I've been saying this for years about the league being the haves and the have-nots, but it really struck me last night. You go through, I think, South Charleston, Spring Valley was 6, South Charleston was 7. So that's half the teams. You cut off the line and go below that. If you look at that, you can't make a case for any of the teams in the bottom half beating any of the teams in the top half through the course of the year. It's just become a have and a have-not, unless, say, Parkersburg or Woodrow, has a great night, all bouncing their way. But to me, really, it's become a top and bottom. It's right down the middle. You have it or you don't have it.
Who would have thought? You mentioned 10 years ago talking about Poca. Who would have thought 10 years ago you said Parkersburg and Woodrow Wilson would be the have-nots?
Right. Well,
yeah.
University, though, is 3-2.
Yeah.
That's another would make that case for a lot of teams, I think.
Every year it seems like there's a traditional power in at least one of the classes that you're just like, wow, didn't see that one coming. But what you might have seen coming is the end of the show, because we've been talking about it for like 10 minutes now. Again, you can find everything we do covering prep football in all ways, shapes, and forms online at wvhuddle.com. We are also on Twitter at wvhuddle, Instagram at wvhuddle. If there's a social media for it, you can find us at wvhuddle. I'm on the Twitter at Tom Bragg Sports. Derek Taylor is at It's Really DT, at R Pritt, at
Rick Ryan WV.
I knew that. So, for the three esteemed minds sitting here with me, Horseman. Anyhow, that's all we got. Thanks for watching, guys.